Hello, and welcome to the African Transformation Spotlight series brought to you by the African Center for Economic Transformation. We are an African-led, African-driven economic policy institute based in Accra, Ghana. We are focused on the entire African continent, and we are connected to the world. My name is Belinda Ayamgha. I am Communications Manager here at ACET, and today we are privileged to be joined by Dr. Amabelle Nwakanma, who is the Director of Programs at LEAP Africa. She has expertise in various areas, including project management, leadership, youth development, empowerment, sustainable development, and gender mainstreaming, among others. Through advocacy and stakeholder engagement, Amabelle has been influential in strengthening local, national, and global discourse on sustainable development with a focus on youth empowerment, gender equality, and inclusion. So we're so happy to have you join us here today, Amabelle. Welcome to the African Transformation Spotlight.
Thank you so much, Belinda. It's a privilege and an honor to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I'll just go directly into the conversation for today. And we are talking about how we can ensure that youth leadership is at the heart of some of the things that we do on the continent. And we know that with your work at LEAP, this is one of the areas where you have focused, right? So the first thing I want to know is, why is youth leadership and entrepreneurship skills important for African economic transformation today?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. They say that everything rises and falls on leadership. And when you have good leadership, when you have people who are equipped to lead well, then it filters and cascades into pretty much every area, every sector, and now talking about Africa. And so we need leaders who can really take the continent where it needs to go, from where we are to where it needs to go. We talk a lot about the potential of Africa, the sleeping giant, and you hear all these narratives about what Africa could be. The difference between where we are and where we should be is leadership. And then entrepreneurship, which is also very linked, but also a bit separate, is the ability to solve problems, find where there's a need or a gap and commit to filling that need and solving those issues, of course, with financial implications. Entrepreneurship is so crucial and critical for our continent because, as you know, we have a huge number of young people in the continent. In fact, Africa is the youngest continent, and there's also such high unemployability and high unemployment. And you have a lot of young people who are trying to transition into the world of work, but there are no jobs that can subsume them. So they need to be empowered to be entrepreneurs, to be the ones who find where the problems are and foster solutions to those problems. And that way, you can diversify economies. You can start to provide jobs and employment. Instead of just being an employee, you can now be an employer of labor. So entrepreneurship opens a world of opportunities for the continent to be able to attract investments, to be able to meet and respond to the wicked problems of our continent and even globally, and to be able to provide jobs, to be able to build and, promote prosperity and economic transformation across the continent. So it's just absolutely critical that when you're thinking about how to develop Africa, how Africa's economic transformation will happen, you cannot think about it without centering and mainstreaming leadership development and entrepreneurship development.
Right. And we all know that there's a gap when it comes to, skills for young people, human capacity in Africa and all of that. And today, if you look at the landscape for many African countries, there are so many other, very equally critical challenges, health challenges, security challenges, financial challenges that many African countries are facing, right? So why should skills development and improving secondary education systems, for instance, be a priority for these countries, considering that they have these other challenges that are equally pressing?
Right. And that's a very fair question. And when you're thinking about skill development and secondary education, you're thinking about what it will do for the long-term sustainability and prosperity of the continent. we cannot afford to focus only on the short-term problems and disregard the need and the importance of paying attention to these long-term issues that will face will face the continent if we're not well prepared for it. So while you are fostering solutions that actually respond to the short-term issues, you have to center in skills development and secondary education. Why secondary education? Because from secondary education, it's a very critical time in a young person's life, and it's a time from which many of them will start to enter into the world of work. Not every young person on the African continent is going to go over into tertiary institutions. Some of them will immediately start becoming entrepreneurs, seeking employment, and for various reasons, you need to prepare them for that world of work, because when they're well skilled, when skills development is centered and prioritized, then what you find is that while you're solving the short-term issues, you're also well positioned and prepared to meet the needs of the longer-term, issues that will be faced. For example, the young people of Africa are transitioning into who are teenagers now are going to be the young people who are moving into the world of work, who are people that are seeking jobs, who are people that are going to contribute to the community for good or for bad, for better or for worse. But you want it to be for better. So you have to prepare them with the right skills, with the right education, and at the right time. And secondary education time is usually a very critical time to start to do these things effectively.
Yeah, that's true. One other thing, I mean, growing up, even now, we joke and we say, oh, some of the things that they were teaching us years ago, they're still being taught in some classrooms today, even though the world is changing, right? And we're moving and all of that. So how can educational technology and innovative pedagogical approaches, how can they help to improve, first of all, the quality, the accessibility, and the relevance of youth skills development? Because if we're teaching young people something that was taught 30, 40 years ago, how relevant is it for today's world of work? So how can we leverage educational technology and innovative pedagogical approaches to make sure that we're really equipping youth with the skills that would actually help them today?
Right. That's a very great point, Belinda. And it's something that increasingly comes up in edutech circles. When you're in any educational conference, especially in the continent, this comes up all the time. And so that tells me that collectively there's this understanding that a lot of the things that we're teaching our young people, they're not fit for purpose. And what is the purpose? The purpose is making them relevant. The purpose is making them competitive in the global marketplace, not just even local, because we're a very globalized world, as you know, but local, of course. But there's no country is an island anymore. You need to be able to be ready to take up challenges and solve problems that are globally relevant. And, I like the question because it does make us think through and try to dissect what are things that need to change in the way we teach. What are things that need to change in our strategy and our approaches, our pedagogical approaches? And one that really sticks with me, I remember I heard it recently when I was in Senegal at an e-learning conference, and they were saying that now we're moving from, back in the day, the teacher was like the most revered person, had all the knowledge. He was the custodian of the knowledge and the tools. But now we live in a knowledge economy where knowledge is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Everybody can have, at the tap of your fingers, you can get all the information. So how do you teach children and young people when they have access to so many things? There's no need to memorize. They just need to Google or go to OpenAI. So now it's moving from the sage on the stage, which is the teacher who is the sage on the stage, to now the guide on the side. So you center the learning, the child, the youth that needs to be taught, and you personalize and create adaptive learning tools and resources that enable them to learn according to what they need. And then you mainstream technology to make sure that not only are they learning in a better way, in a way that's more effective and efficient, but they're learning skills, digital skills that will serve them in the globalized digital world that we live in. There's such a huge digital divide right now between Africa and the rest of the world. I mean, it's a bit alarming when you think about it, when you think really deeply about it. it feels like the world is leaving Africa behind when it comes to digital upskilling, when it comes to digital technology. And there's a huge market of young people across the continent who are underserved, who don't have access to connectivity or tools or resources. There needs to be ways that we are able to reach them. There needs to be ways that we modify how we teach and what we teach so that what they learn is relevant to what the world needs from them. Otherwise, what will happen is that you'll have a set of young people, the most numerous group of young people on the planet, who will not be ready to serve, who will not be ready to contribute, who would not be equipped and therefore made somewhat redundant. And that is something that we cannot let happen.
Yeah. Are there maybe some best practices or examples that you've come across, either you've implemented in your work at LEAP or that you've come across elsewhere in the world that you think are something that African countries can learn from, particularly in light of the challenges that we have, with the digital divide and all that? Are there some examples you can share?
So at LEAP, one of the things that we try to set at LEAP Africa is that we want to ensure that we're not focusing on only the people that have access to resources. So we believe very much in equity, and we find that with our constituents and people we work with, there's a lot of inequity in terms of the access to tools and connectivity, the access to learning, quality education. So some of the things we do with one of our programs, which we call the iLead, which is targeted at secondary students, because as you would know, perhaps Belinda, one of our big bets at LEAP Africa is making secondary education work. So what we believe is that we don't want to come in and, be the teachers and take over, but we believe that the education needs to be supplemented and enhanced in a way that enables our young people to be ready for the world of work. And some of the things that we have thought about, and I've also seen with some of our partners, is how do we even get where you find there's power issues or energy issues and connectivity issues, how do we even have, tools and resources that people in remote communities can leverage and utilize without needing the internet, without needing power and energy, whereas things can be offline, offline educational resources, and you do it in partnership. So for example, with us and with some of our partners, they do it in partnership with local grassroots workers, which is why we so believe in empowering people at the grassroots, because we believe that they're really in the trenches, getting to the people that we may not be able to get to. And therefore, we can cascade the learnings and the support and empower them to be activated to provide things like these resources. So they might have one device for students for a class of 50, for example. But you see, that device can have enough quality content that really builds skills of people there who would otherwise never have the opportunity to get this information. I'll give you a story, a bit of an anecdote. I went to a remote area, and this was in Cross River, and we were driving for so long, and I kept saying to myself, are we sure that we're not leaving Nigeria altogether? Because I couldn't believe that there were such remote places in this country, and these places were so far removed from urban life. And when I got there finally, I see this massive community of people who are so far removed, and I think to myself, don't the young people and the children in this community deserve the same access to education, quality education? Aren't these the young people we talk about that will tomorrow be the youth of Africa, that will be 1 in 4 young people will be African? This is them. This is them here who are far away from nowhere. They should be prioritized. They should be centered. And increasingly, we have a social innovators program because we believe so much in social entrepreneurship as the kind of entrepreneurship that we really want to support. Entrepreneurship that focuses on social change and social development. And we have a few of our fellows who are designing products that provide access to education in these rural, remote areas for these young people who would never probably have that same kind of access. When we went there, the ladies were saying to me, the mothers were saying that one person might have a cell phone, and they have to kind of go up a mountain to get a connection before they can make a phone call to the city. So you can imagine the lack of connectivity and tools. There has to be a way to get them the support they need without it being that, oh, you have to move to the city. We have to meet them where they are at. And that's one of the things that we really try to do. And we really try to encourage our partners and our ecosystem to do as well.
Right. That's absolutely hits the nail on the head. And it actually leads me to the next question I have, which is the issue of, we try to be as inclusive as we can, but oftentimes there are particular sets of people that are left behind, whether inadvertently or not, in these kinds of work. Young women and girls, children or young people living with disabilities, other marginalized groups. So how do we ensure that we're promoting that gender equality and social inclusion as far as youth skills development is concerned? Because we tend to often not think about these groups, but they are the ones that are, the gap is wider there and we need to bridge that gap. So how do we ensure that we're promoting inclusion in that respect, and what are the barriers that you've seen in terms of inclusivity in youth skills development, and have you seen some enablers that we can scale and replicate across the continent?
Gender equality and social inclusion is just the thing I like to talk about. And of course, I've given an anecdote to show you just how inclusive I love to be. I always think about the least served, and that's just personally, and even through Leap Africa, we really do think about the least served. And one of the things I believe and I say is that we first have to start with a mindset shift in our continent. The idea that human capital is maybe domiciled with a few able-bodied people, or maybe males, just men, that needs to shift. And it is shifting, thank goodness, but there's a lot more work to be done. We have a large disability community in Africa, and the fact that they're differently abled does not mean that they don't have a lot to contribute. In fact, many of them have a lot to contribute and just need the opportunity to do it. In fact, there was a campaign of some disability rights activists here, and they wrote out this thing, and they called it Ready to Serve. We are ready to serve. We are ready to work. We're ready to do the thing. And, so one of the things that we believe in strongly at the organization, and again, personally too, is you cannot incidentally be inclusive. You have to be intentionally be inclusive. It has to be an intentional act. You have to integrate it in how you design programs, how you design interventions, how you design initiatives. It has to be front and center that this is for everyone. Everyone should be welcome to the table. Everyone's perspective and feedback and ideas should be received, should be well received. But it's not going to happen if you just say, you know what, yeah, everyone is welcome. Yeah, sure. In theory, you have to do the work, be intentional about ensuring. And how do you do it? In little ways, like even disaggregating. You know that you're going to a place, be able to understand the community you're serving. If you're going to a place and you know that there's a high number of people that are dealing with disabilities, or maybe, there's a high number of female to male, you can only know that because you did research, because you did like a needs assessment or a rapid assessment or baseline. And then using that information, you start to design opposite intervention. So you know that, okay, there's lots of young women who are going to be participating. What are some of the things that they need to enable them to participate? And this comes down to the enabling parts of inclusion and gender equality, as well as the barriers. Some of the barriers would just be not even thinking about them, not just taking things for granted. So we're trying to reach 100 people, and you're not thinking about how many of them may be women, how many of them may be disabled. Some things that we've done at Leap Africa recently was, actively connect with the disability community. We have it's called JONAPED, and it's an association that is constituted to serve persons with disabilities. And we just wanted to get their input on, okay, we have a learning management system. We have quite a lot of our programs. How can we encourage them to get involved? How can we encourage them to avail of the programs and services that we offer? Let them know that we're thinking of them. So little things like making sure there's closed captioning, having a sign language interpreter at pretty much all our events, making sure that, there's a ramp to make sure that people in wheelchairs are able to come into the programs. and even having target numbers. Affirmative action is a good thing. I know that there's a lot of things that have happened in the US recently, but it gives opportunities to people who may otherwise not have opportunities. And I remember an incident where, and this happened out of Leap Africa, where we had, we find that in the entrepreneurship space, especially social entrepreneurship, there's an overwhelming number of males that apply for it. So it feels like women are less confident, or for whatever reasons are not as, we don't get as many of them applying. And so we changed our targets and our strategy to make sure that we're encouraging women to actually bring in their ideas, and let's even help you vet it to an extent. And, there was an incident that happened where we wanted to give some funding, and we noticed that everyone that we felt was deserving of the funding was going to be male. So we went back internally and said, you know what, this is where affirmative action is going to be very useful. We need to support a certain number to only be women for these. We cannot have a gender equitable organization have only males receiving scholarships or funding. So we had to change. And it's just little things like that, having that intentionality to make sure that we are being equitable in our practices. We are mainstreaming gender and inclusion across everything that we do. It's very important. And what happens there is that economic transformation, development is accelerated and expedited because now you're getting the expertise and the wisdom and experiences of the entire populace as opposed to just one segment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go into my next question. I mean, governments all over the continent are trying. I mean, we're making little progress here and there. But what should, first of all, governments, let's say employers, other stakeholders, what should they be doing? I mean, what can they and what should they be doing more to ensure that young people are involved, particularly in decision-making processes? Because we talk about youth involvement in some of these processes, and sometimes it's just tokenistic, right? So we're doing something,
right.
Let's get one young person to participate just to tick a box, So how can we make sure that all these people are actually involving young people in these decision-making mechanisms? Are there some platforms that you've seen that are effective, and how can we make sure that their participation is active and is meaningful and not just tokenistic?
Very good question. And again, something that comes up so many times. We talk a lot about youth inclusion, and if you think about it, we constitute the majority of the continent, and the people that will be in decision-making offices tomorrow will be these young people. So it's good to start even tapping from the knowledge and the wisdom and the creativity and agility that they represent. But again, it cannot be incidental. It has to be deliberate. And one thing, for example, at Leap Africa, when we're thinking about youth, anything that, all our programs are very much youth focused, but sometimes, we also think about youth enablers. How do we help them to even design programs that properly support young people? But everything that we're doing that is targeted at our young people, we want their perspective. So it's basically nothing for us without us. That phrase, that mantra that we hear a lot. We want you to tell us, so this is this idea we have. What are your thoughts about it? We need young people to be able to review policies. We need youth advisory councils. And, through our Nigerian Youth Futures Fund, which is a 5-year project that we commenced 2021, we constituted a youth working group and delegates across the country who would speak to what are the issues that we're facing in Nigeria and what do we want to see as young people for this country? Because the wicked problems and the issues that we're facing, they will only be exacerbated if we don't start to rectify and correct right now. And so it all culminated in the Nigeria We Want report, which is something that we consider to be an advocacy instrument that we can use to advocate for various policies, and including, youth inclusion. Can young people's voices be heard? Let the government and the stakeholders, let them actually create opportunities for young people to do things and get it to the ears and the tables of those who are in power. But one of the things that I also try to avoid, because I hear that a lot in our context, especially in Africa, you hear about young people they don't respect the elders, and it's always this age thing. And So some things that we try to do is intergenerational
Yeah.
dialogue, right? Fostering that sense of allyship. We're not at odds. We want the same thing, but we want to just be heard. We want to be involved in the things that are going to affect our lives, the things that are going to affect our futures and our children's futures. So, it's not about, there's no competition here. It's allyship. And that's the approach we take at Leap Africa, is that we want it to be an opportunity for young people alongside young youth enablers and youth allies, I like to call them, to come together and co-create the future in a way that is inclusive of the perspectives and the needs of the young people. And again, like I said, youth advisory councils, even appointing young people into offices like Commissioner of Youth should be young. You find in Nigeria, of all the commissioners of youth in Nigeria, there's only one person that's a youth. Every other person is 50s, 60s, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? So we need to start thinking about how can we get young people to offices that give them an opportunity for agency and put their voices in decision tables, in committees, and not just tokenistically, like you mentioned, Belinda, but in a way that we really do want to hear what you think, and we want to action based off of what you've said. And a lot of times we say this and people listen and say, yes, we hear, but then you don't necessarily see the traction that should follow. But you have to keep kind of hitting the nail in the wall just to get through the hole. And that's what we hope to do. And one final thing I'll say on that is, it's not just the government that should be to be responsible for this. We are all responsible for it. So at Leap Africa, as a non-profit, we have taken our mandate to push youth inclusivity across all facets and sectors. But then the private sector has a role to play. Other civil society sectors, international community, we have to talk about it enough and create opportunities enough. The young people also see themselves as the change makers and feel enabled and empowered to do things. Otherwise, they themselves would just say, you know what, no one gives us a chance. It's just leave it. Let's just keep on going. And then they're discouraged and disillusioned by the system. And then you can't even bring out the diamond and the thing in them, the essence that will actually make the changes that we need and promote sustainable development and economic transformation and entrepreneurship and education and skills. You can't even get that out because you're not even giving them the chance. So I think all hands have to be on deck. But it does start with the enabling environment from policy and the regulatory environment that centers and mainstreams youth inclusivity.
Wow. I could go on and on, but that's a perfect way to bring our conversation to a close, because it's been such an interesting one. We could go on all day. So thank you so much, Amabelle, for making time to join us on the African Transformation Spotlight today. Before you go, I'm going to give you one last question. So July 15th is going to be World Youth Skills Day. What would be your word? Let me give you two. One to the youth and one to African decision makers and other stakeholders, in the youth skills development space. What would be your one word to them?
Be ambitious. I would say for young people, be ambitious. I think that the environment that we've lived in has been limiting, to be honest. It's been limiting in terms of what the structural framework has been across countries, the social political and socio-economic context. And a lot of times you find that hopelessness, and that's why in Nigeria we have the Japa syndrome. We're losing all young people in droves to the West. So for me, I would say be ambitious, believe that you can and you should go for it. And to the youth enablers, put your money where your mouth is. I know that's a sentence, not a word, but maybe I'll say the word would be integrity. So when you come together and we talk about all the things, say what you mean and mean what you say. When you say, I want to center young people, I want to give them opportunities, then do just that, So thank you, Belinda.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amabelle. You've been listening to the African Transformation Spotlight, and we were joined today by Dr. Amabelle Nwakanma, who is Director of Programs at Leap Africa. The African Transformation Spotlight is brought to you by the African Center for Economic Transformation, and we hope to see you again another time with another edition of this conversation. We hope that you find this useful and that you become a youth advocate in whatever space you find yourself in. If you'd like to know more about the African Center for Economic Transformation, you can find us on our website, www.assetforafrica.org, and on all our social media platforms at Asset for Africa. Until I come again next time, my name is Belinda Ayamgha, and I'm Communications Manager here at ACET.